Thank you very much. Thank you. Please be seated. It's an honor to be here once again to speak at this great festival. Albert introduced himself and me, and he described me as his pastor. In our church, he's actually titled as an executive pastor, and within the current context, I'm not sure who is in charge of the day-to-day running of the church. The essence, I believe, of this festival is to challenge, to inspire, and to create an opportunity for people to expand their thinking, to expand the ideas that are possible for them to dream about and to work with. Just about probably 2 weeks ago, I referred to an analogy, and I think it would fit into what Kweku Awotri talked about regarding the wealth. I'm not sure whether it was the wealth or the purchasing power of Africa in the next probably 17 or so years, which would get to 4 trillion. And the potential of our population growth that will get us to about 1 billion people, and try to position the opportunity that was available to us as a people. And when you say Africa, within that context, there are 54 countries, so you're not sure which portion of the 4 trillion would end up in Ghana. But be that as it may, it was a 3-fold growth from where we are now. Africa's current worth is 2.4 trillion, which seems to be an impressive number, especially when you consider just the word trillion as a very uncommon word to pronounce. The only time I've had the opportunity to use trillion freely was when I was in Zimbabwe a few years ago, where their dollar was denominated in trillions. And I actually have packages of 100 trillion Zimbabwean dollars, which I'm still keeping and hoping that one day would have real value back in it. But trillion is always an impressive number within whatever currency except the Zimbabwean dollar. So to think of Africa as 2.4 trillion is quite a formidable thought. But I juxtaposed that number with the value of 4 companies in our world. At the time I was speaking, Apple company was not yet 1 trillion. It was officially 950 billion. A couple of days after I made that analogy, Apple was 1 trillion. So that just almost halves Africa's worth. Microsoft is about 570 billion US dollars. Facebook, which was started when most of us were very much active in life, that's 2004, is worth, well, depending on how the current crisis they were in has affected them, is worth about 500 billion. Amazon, which we just heard of, is worth about 430 billion. If you put these 4 companies together, it's more than 2.5 trillion. That means, in a sense, just 4 companies producing worth more than our continent. So when he talked about the potential for growth in our purchasing power in the next 17 or so years. It seemed like a great improvement, but really it's nothing, because Africa's growth at the rate we are engaged in has to be radically different from our historic performance. What we have done in the past cannot get us anywhere to competing with any part of the world. We cannot compete with the United States, we cannot compete with Europe, cannot compete with Asia, cannot compete with South America, because we are way behind, and at growth rates that we are working with now, it will be difficult for us to catch up. So much as I appreciate a 4 trillion economy, I think it's woefully inadequate, distributed around for 1 billion people. And Albert actually said that then it means all of us have got $4,000. And I don't know what you're going to do with $4,000 if it's given to you. If you took your child to any very good school and you have 3 children, that would be the end of your $4,000. If you took your child to university, you couldn't even pay the fees for the first year in university outside of Ghana. Even if you wanted to buy a car, a $4,000 car would move, but would be quite embarrassing to you somewhere along the line. So we have to create far more than the $4,000 per person or 4 trillion. So I challenged the people I was speaking to, and by extension the continent of Africa, that if we really want to have meaningful growth, we have to aim at a minimum of 20% GDP growth for the next 20 years. I mentioned that to somebody who was in a very responsible position in another African country, very significant person, and instantly he laughed and said, "Is that possible?" Well, just for that person to ask that question, "Is that possible?" means we would not even attempt it. I said, well, you know, Zimbabwe had 1,000,000% inflation. Is that possible? Well, Africa has an ability to achieve tremendous success in the negatives. But when it comes to the positives, we find it very difficult to really fix our mind to try to engage that. So I said, well, if we could do that in negative, I think 20% growth is possible. I said, by the way, Facebook, which most of us are on, use it for various purposes, has grown for the last 5 years, averagely 50%. 50% average growth, last 5 years. You can say, well, it's a company. Well, if one young 25-year-old boy can create a company that grows at 50% every year, I don't think that it's too much for us all, 29 million of us, to create one idea that grows at 50% per annum. It's a mindset. I think one of the challenges we have is we are very brilliant with nice ideas, but very shy of bold ideas. For things to be different, there has to be audacity. Audacity is a very uncomfortable thought, because it is like walking on water and hoping that you would not drown. It is like trying to climb the highest mountain and hoping that you will not be frozen to death. There has to be something in us that dares to achieve something extraordinary. Yolanda said she just returned from China just for this presentation this evening. I had my first opportunity to go to China this year. Who goes to China anyway? I mean, when I was growing up, China was not any place you would put on your calendar to ever visit. You would want to go to America, you want to go to Germany or Britain, even to Australia. But who goes to China? The picture we had of China was people in identifiable suits, which was called the Mao suit, and all colored blue, and who ate rice a lot, and who were very, very poor. So China was not on anybody's bucket list. So I said, well, China is doing well, we're buying their products, so let me go and visit China. So I went this year. Quite an interesting experience for me, but something just clicked for me when I was there. When I visited the Forbidden City, and this is the huge palace that has housed various emperors over 1,000 or so years, and to just see the scale of it. I've been to several palaces in Europe and been impressed by the grandeur of the castles in Europe, but nothing on that massive, broad, spread out scale and the ornate decorations and just the elegance of what these people created 1,000 years ago. And when I saw that, I just said, I understand why they are able to create what they are creating today. Because if these people could do this 1,000 years ago, what would stop them from eating up everybody? And by the way, Yolanda, it's not just the mice. The sharks are still around. And sometimes you get eaten by both mice and sharks. And it's a double jeopardy, but it happens. So something just struck me, that there was a historicity about their development. It just didn't happen. They had the mental infrastructure. They had the cultural architecture. They had the disposition to be able to do it. Obviously, probably kinds of governments they had pursued and systems of governance they had pursued did not harness the potential that the various emperors had in the past dynasties. But when the trigger came, they instantly rediscovered their greatness and made it work. So I started thinking, on what basis can a nation like Ghana grow? What would be the ideas we grow with? What would be the mindset that we grow with? What would trigger Africa's growth? What is it that will help us break out from limitation? In the Bible, there is a story in 2 Kings. And it travels from 2 Kings chapter 6 to chapter 7. And it's a story that speaks to breaking out of confines. Samaria, a major city, is under siege from the Syrians. And in the battle, the Syrians did not enter Samaria to fight Samaria. They just stayed around and hemmed them in. And that was one of the battle strategies in those days. People wanted to defeat you. They just build a camp around you. In those days, nations or cities had walls. So if they build a siege around you, what simply happens is that you are locked in, your doors are shut, and you don't go out. your farms are outside your city gates, but you can't go out to farm. You can't expand your national life. A siege may not seem like a very threatening battle because nobody's really killing you. But over time, your resources dry up and you just realize that you're not able to expand yourself. So that's what happened to Samaria. And everything became very, very limited. Started dying. Food became scarce. They were selling donkeys' heads. And the worst thing is that they started eating up their children. This is a very symbolic gesture and speak to when people are in the siege and start eating up their future as a meal and think that they actually providing strength for themselves. So the king is approached by a woman who is complaining and complains to the king and says, look what happened. Just last week, me and my friend decided that we will eat our children. So we boiled my child and ate, and then we finished eating my child, and now we want to eat her child. This is not witchcraft eating. This is proper eating. We want to eat this woman's child, and she's hitting her child. I mean, the enormity of the thought is that this is a woman speaking. I mean, a man can say that, and we'll say, well, you know, men don't have the same compassion as women. But for a woman to get to the point of eating her own child, that shows the dire condition they were in. At that time, the prophet Elisha was brought in because the king was very upset, thinking that he was the cause of the problem. And Elisha said something quite extraordinary to the king. He says, tomorrow about this time, the condition will change and there will be abundance. And the experts laughed at him and said, it cannot happen. What do you take us for? And so on and so forth. There are 4 lepers outside the gate of Samaria who decided that they were going to do something about the situation. And they made a logical argument. If we stay here, we die. And if we go to the Syrian camp, we die too. So we have to choose 2 kinds of death. The staying death or the moving death. Then they made another deduction. Well, if we stayed and died, there would be no benefit. But if we went to the Syrians, there could be a chance that they will have mercy on us and may not actually kill us. And so by moving forward and defying this confinement, although it's a major risk, there is a possibility of some outcome that will be positive. So they took out, and when they went to the Syrian camp, by some divine intervention, the Syrians had left. They left all their food behind, and instantly the economy of Samaria changed. Now, if you quote that to secular economists, they will say those things don't happen again. But those things happen again. Because in our lifetime, we have seen China break out of the siege. They broke out because for a long time, they put themselves under siege under Chairman Mao. Then Deng Xiaoping came and broke the siege. And it didn't happen in 24 hours, but overnight, that monster rose and is eating up the world. And that's not a mouse, that's a big monster eating up the world. So, it's possible for a nation to be under a self-imposed siege. Mentally, structurally, we can put ourselves in a condition where venturing becomes a fatal expedition. So it seems as if trying to do anything extraordinary becomes a fatal expedition. You know, today we've talked about some powerful companies. We've talked about Amazon. I must say, I think I was one of the earliest adopters of Amazon. Because by nature, I'm a very early adopter. I was one of the first people, I think, who used the Kindle. When Amazon started, people didn't know it. Look at where Amazon is. Apple. I wasn't an adopter very early, but I started using an Apple computer in the 80s. So I started quite early. 1976, they started. Look what they've done. The interesting thing about all of them is that most of these companies, they are recent, and we can point to a person or a group of people who made a difference. So when are we going to have our own Apple? Are we going to have a lecture like this and it will not be Apple, and it will not be Amazon, and it will not be Airbnb, and it will not be Netflix, but it will be something we created, and the person who is talking about it is the one who created it and can talk about it. We must transition from managing people's stories to creating our own stories. It's great to be part of a global economy created by others. But who was talking about WeChat? Was it you? That's what I like about the Chinese. You WhatsApp here, they will WeChat there. You Amazon here, they will Alibaba there. Because they understood, in spite of the siege they had been under of totalitarian state control, that the greatest way to break the siege is to empower the lepers to go out to the Syrian camp. That you have to empower individuals. Now, empowering individuals is risky, but that is what has made the difference. Even a totalitarian nation like China has broken the siege. So where is Africa in this? And, you know, when you talk about Africa, Africa is not as monolithic as we want it to be. There are places in Africa that are more empowering of individuals, and there are places that are less empowering. The future of our growth will not be in our government or even our state institutions. It is going to be private people who create the opportunity and make it possible for others to be pulled along. And until we find the key to use policy and regulation to empower people, we can build the business institutions, but no one will participate in the opportunities we are creating. In fact, the reverse of that is that you will create the opportunities in your country and so disempower your people that only foreigners can come in and take advantage of the opportunities you are creating. There has to be a breaking of the siege. There has to be people who step out and do the bold things. And the people who do the bold things may not even be the most brilliant people. They may not have all the best ideas. They may not even have the best education. As we have seen with some of the people who have done great things in the world, some were dropouts, didn't finish their course. It doesn't mean they were not brilliant, but just maybe a bit too hasty and dropped out of school. Some didn't have all the strength that you will, if you were employing him, most of you would not employ him. Was it Mr. Hua here who was talking about the person he would employ? I'm sure that if Jeff Bezos had come to you, probably you wouldn't employ him, because most people who end up breaking the siege are very, very different from the ordinary person who fits the mold. And they would not fit your mold, they would defy your mold. But they are the game changers, they are the ones who make the difference. Yes, we can get people who fit the mold, but if we want to grow this continent and this nation, we're going to get some lepers who change the discourse and change the direction. And I believe the future in Africa, for Ghana, for all of us, for entrepreneurs, is to empower and create this atmosphere that makes people go out and make a difference. I hope that in this Festival of Ideas, whilst we are talking about technology, I am talking about the oldest technology of all time, the human brain. Not the machine, not artificial intelligence, the real intelligence and the real spirit and the enthusiasm of the human being which makes him go out there and make a difference. Thank you, and God bless you.